Welcome to Madison Public Library in Madison, Ohio's Theater of the Mind, Halloween edition. Tonight we conclude The Premature Burial by Edgar Allan Poe. To hear more stories like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Last night, we left off with the narrator about to tell of his own experience of burial before death, and we return to the conclusion of The Premature Burial by Edgar Allan Poe. For several years, I have been subject to attacks of the singular disorder which physicians have agreed to term catalepsy, in default of a more definite title. Although both the immediate and the predisposing causes, and even the actual diagnosis of this disease, are still mysterious, its obvious and apparent character is sufficiently well understood. Its variations seem to be chiefly of degree. Sometimes the patient lies for a day only, or even for a shorter period, in a species of exaggerated lethargy. He is senseless and externally motionless, but the pulsation of the heart is still faintly perceptible. Some traces of warmth remain, a slight color lingers within the center of the cheek, and upon application of a mirror to the lips, we can detect a torpid, unequal, and vacillating action of the lungs. Then again, the duration of the trance is for weeks, even for months, while the closest scrutiny and the most rigorous medical tests fail to establish any material distinction between the state of the sufferer and what we conceive of as absolute death. Very usually he is saved from premature interment solely by the knowledge of his friends that he has been previously subject to catalepsy, by the consequent suspicion excited, and above all by the non-appearance of decay. The advances of the malady are luckily gradual. The first manifestations, although marked, are unequivocal. The fits grow successively more and more distinctive, and endure each for a longer term than the preceding. In this lies the principal security from inhumation. The unfortunate whose first attack should be of the extreme character which is occasionally seen would almost inevitably be consigned alive to a tomb. My own case differed in no important particular from those mentioned in medical books. Sometimes, without any apparent cause, I sank little by little into a condition of semi-syncope or half-swoon, and in this condition, without pain, without ability to stir, strictly speaking, to think, but with a dull, lethargic consciousness of life and of the presence of those who surrounded my bed, I remained until the crisis of the disease restored me suddenly to perfect sensation. At other times I was quickly and impetuously smitten. I grew sick and numb and chilly and dizzy, and so fell prostrate at once. Then, for weeks, all was void and black and silent, and nothing became the universe. Total annihilation could be no more. From these latter attacks I awoke, however, with a gradual slow in proportion to the suddenness of the seizure. Just as the day dawns to the friendless and houseless beggar who roams the streets throughout the long desolate winter night, just so tardily, just so warily, just so cheerily came back the light of the soul to me. Apart from the tendency to trance, however, my general health appeared to be good, nor could I perceive that it was all affected by the one prevalent malady, unless indeed an idiosyncrasy of my ordinary sleep may be looked upon as superinduced. Upon awakening from slumber, I could never gain at once thorough possession of my senses, and always remained for many minutes in such bewilderment and perplexity, the mental faculties in general, but the memory in especial, being in a condition of absolute abeyance. In all that I endured, there was no physical suffering, but of moral distress and infinitude. My fancy grew charnel. I talked of worms, of tombs, of epitaphs. I was lost in reveries of death, and the idea of premature burial held continual possession of my brain. The ghastly danger to which I was subjected haunted me day and night. In the former, the torture of meditation was excessive; in the latter, supreme. When the grim darkness overspread the earth, then with every horror of thought I shook as the quivering plumes upon the hearse. When nature could endure wakefulness no longer, it was a struggle that I consented to sleep, for I shuddered to reflect that upon awakening I might find myself the tenant of the grave. and when finally I sank into slumber, it was only to rush at once into a world of phantasms, above which, with vast, sable, overshadowing wings, hovered predominant the one sepulchral idea. From the innumerable images of gloom which thus oppressed me in dreams, I selected for record but a solitary vision. Methought I was immersed in a cataleptic trance of more than usual duration and profundity. Suddenly there came an icy hand upon my forehead, and an impatient, gibbering voice whispering, "Arise," within my ear. I sat erect. The darkness was total. I could not see the figure of him who had aroused me. I could call to mind neither the period at which I had fallen into the trance, nor the locality in which I then lay. While I remained motionless and busied in endeavors to collect my thoughts, the cold hand grasped me fiercely by the wrist, shaking it petulantly, while the gibbering voice again said, "Arise. Did I not bid thee arise?" "And who," I demanded, "art thou?" "I have no name in the regions which I inhabit," replied the voice mournfully. "I was mortal, but am fiend. I am merciless, but am pitiful. Thou dost feel that I shudder, my teeth chatter as I speak, yet it is not with the chilliness of the night without end. But this hideousness is insufferable. How canst thou tranquilly sleep? I cannot rest for the cry of these great agonies. These sights are more than I can bear. Give thee up. Come with me into the outer night, and let me unfold to thee the graves. Is not this a spectacle of woe? Behold." I looked, and the unseen figure, which still grasped me by the wrist, had caused to be thrown open the graves of all mankind, and from each issued the faint phosphoric radiance of decay, so that I could see into the innermost recesses, and there view the shrouded bodies in their sad and solemn slumbers with the worm. But alas, the real sleepers were few by many millions than those who slumbered not at all. And there was a feeble struggling, and there was a general and sad unrest, and from out the depths of all the countless pits there came a melancholy rustling from the garments of the buried. And of those who seemed tranquilly to repose, I saw that a vast number had changed in a greater or less degree the rigid and uneasy position in which they had originally been entombed. And the voice again said to me as I gazed, "Is it not? Oh, is it not a pitiful sight?" But before I could find words to reply, the figure had ceased to grasp my wrist, the phosphoric lights expired, and the graves were closed with a sudden violence, while from out them arose a tumult of despairing cries, saying again, "Is it not, O God, is it not a very pitiful sight?" Phantasms such as these, presenting themselves at night, extended their terrific influence far into my waking hours. My nerves became thoroughly unstrung, and I fell a prey to perpetual horror. I hesitated to ride, or to walk, or to indulge in any exercise that would carry me from home. In fact, I no longer dared trust myself out of the immediate presence of those who were aware of my proneness to catalepsy, lest, falling into one of my usual fits, I should be buried before my real condition could be ascertained. I doubted the care, the fidelity of my dearest friends. I dreaded that, in some trance of more than customary duration, they might be prevailed upon to regard me as irrecoverable. I even went so far as to fear that, as it occasioned much trouble, they might be glad to consider any very protracted attack as sufficient excuse for getting rid of me altogether. It was in vain they endeavored to reassure me by the most solemn promises. I exacted the most sacred oaths that under no condition they would bury me until decomposition had so materially advanced as to render further preservation impossible. And even then my mortal terrors would listen to no reason, would accept no consolation. I entered into a series of elaborate precautions. Among other things, I had the family vault so remodeled as to admit of being readily opened from within. The slightest pressure upon a long lever that extended far into the tomb would cause the iron portals to fly back. There were arrangements also for the free admission of air and light, and convenient receptacles for food and water within immediate reach of the coffin intended for my reception. This coffin was warmly and softly padded, and was provided with a lid fashioned upon the principle of the vault door, with the addition of springs so contrived that the feeblest movement of the body would be sufficient to set it at liberty. Besides all this, there were suspended from the roof of the tomb a large bell, the rope of which it was designed should extend through a hole in the coffin, and so be fastened to one of the hands of the corpse. But, alas, what avails the vigilance against the destiny of man? Not even these well-contrived securities suffice to save from the utmost agonies of living inhumation a wretch to these agonies foredoomed. The arrival of an epoch, as often before there had arrived, in which I found myself emerging from total unconsciousness into the first feeble and indefinite sense of existence. Slowly, with a tortoise gradation, approached the faint gray dawn of the cycle day, a torpid uneasiness, an apathetic endurance of dull pain, no care, no hope, no effort. Then after a long interval, a ringing in the ears, then after a lapse still longer, a pricking or tingling sensation in the extremities, then a seemingly eternal period of pleasurable quiescence, during which the awaking feelings are struggling into thought, then a brief resinking into nonentity, then a sudden recovery. At length, the slight quivering of an eyelid, of immediately thereupon an electric shock of terror, deadly and indefinite, which sends the blood in torrents from the temples to the heart. And now the first positive effort to think, and now the first endeavor to remember, and now a partial and evanescent success. And now the memory has so far regained its dominion that in some measure I am cognizant of my state. I feel that I am not awaking from ordinary sleep. I recall that I have been subject to catalepsy, and now at last, as if by the rush of an ocean, my shuddering spirit is overwhelmed by the one grim danger, by the one spectral and ever-prevalent idea. For some minutes after this fancy possessed me, I remained without motion. And why? I could not summon courage to move. I dared not make the effort which was to satisfy me of my fate, and yet there was something at my heart which whispered me it was sure. Despair, such as no other species of wretchedness ever calls into being, despair alone urged me, after long irresolution, to uplift the heavy lids of my eyes. I uplifted them. It was dark, all dark. I knew that the fit was over. I knew that the crisis of my disorder had long passed. I knew that I was now fully recovered the use of my visual faculties, and yet it was dark, all dark, the intense and utter raylessness of the night that endureth for evermore. I endeavored to shriek, and my lips and my parched tongue moved convulsively together in the attempt, but no voice issued from the cavernous lungs, which, oppressed as if by the weight of some incumbent mountain, gasped and palpitated, with the heart at every elaborate and struggling inspiration. The movement of the jaws, in this effort to cry aloud, showed me that they were bound up, as is usual with the dead. I felt, too, that I lay upon some hard substance, and by something similar my sides were also closely compressed. So far I had not ventured to stir any of my limbs, but now I violently threw up my arms, which had been lying at length with the wrists crossed. They struck a solid wooden substance, which extended above my person at an elevation of not more than 6 inches from my face. I could no longer doubt that I reposed within a coffin at last. And now, amid all my infinite miseries, came sweetly the cherub hope. For I thought of my precautions. I writhed and made spasmodic exertions to force open the lid. It would not move. I felt my wrists for the belt rope, but it would not be found. And now the comforter fled forever, and a still sterner despair reigned triumphant, for I could not help perceiving the absence of the paddings which I had so carefully prepared. And then, too, there came suddenly to my nostrils the strong, peculiar odor of moist earth. The conclusion was irresistible. I was not within the vault. I had fallen into a trance while absent from home, while among strangers, when or how I could not remember. And it was they who had buried me as a dog, nailed up in some common coffin and thrust deep, deep, and forever into some ordinary and nameless grave. At this awful conviction forced itself thus into the innermost chambers of my soul, I once again struggled to cry aloud. And in this second endeavor I succeeded. A long, wild, and continuous shriek or yell of agony resounded through the realms of the subterranean night. "Hello! Hello there!" said a gruff voice in reply. "What the devil's the matter now?" said the second. "Get out of that," said a third. "What do you mean by yowling in their kind of style like a catty mount?" said a fourth. And hereupon I was seized and shaken without ceremony for several minutes by a junto of very rough-looking individuals. They did not arouse me from my slumber, for I was wide awake when I screamed, but they restored me to the full possession of my memory. This adventure occurred near Richmond, in Virginia. Accompanied by a friend, I had proceeded upon a gunning expedition some miles down the banks of the James River. Night approached, and we were overtaken by a storm. The cabin in a small sloop lying at anchor in the stream and laden with garden mold afforded us the only available shelter. We made the best of it and passed the night on board. I slept in one of the only 2 berths in the vessel, and the berths of the sloop of 60 or 70 tons need scarcely be described. That which I occupied had no bedding of any kind. Its extreme width was 18 inches. In distance, its bottom from the deck overhead was precisely the same. I found it a matter of exceeding difficulty to squeeze myself in. Nevertheless, I slept soundly, and the whole of my vision, for it was no dream and no nightmare, arose naturally from the circumstances of my position, from my ordinary bias of thought, and from the difficulty to which I have alluded of collecting my senses, and especially of regaining my memory for a long time after awaking from slumber. The men who shook me were the crew of the sloop and some laborers engaged to unload it. From the load itself came the earthy smell. The bandage about my jaw was a silk handkerchief in which I had bound up my head in default of my customary nightcap. The tortures endured, however, were indubitably quite equal for the time to those of actual sepulture. They were inconceivably hideous, but out of evil proceeded good. For their very excess wrought in my spirit an inevitable revulsion. My soul acquired tone, acquired temper. I went abroad. I took vigorous exercise. I breathed the free air of heaven. I thought upon other subjects than death. I discarded my medical books. Buchan I buried. I read no night thoughts, no fustian about courtyards, no bugaloo tales such as this. In short, I became a new man, and lived a man's life. From that memorable night I dismissed from ever my charnel apprehensions, and with them vanished the catacleptic disorder of which perhaps they had been less the consequence than the cause. There are moments when, even to the sober eye of reason, the world of our sad humanity may assume the semblance of a hell. But the imagination of man is no Catharthus. To explore with impunity its every cavern, alas! The grim legion of sepulchral terrors cannot be regarded as altogether fanciful, but like the demons in whose company Aphrodite made his voyage down to Oxus, they must sleep, or they will devour us. They must be suffered to slumber, or we perish. And this was the conclusion of The Premature Burial by Edgar Allan Poe. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest.